better, and everyone seemed to focus really, really well in the Zoom oral arguments. So I have liked it. And I think it is something, and we haven't had a bank meeting in a while, but one of the things that I think we should continue to do, if people feel uncomfortable coming to the courthouse when we eventually open up, it's something that we can make available. But if you have lawyers who are in Valdosta or in North Georgia, it's something I think that the Court of Appeals should consider utilizing for people who just simply, it's harder for them to get here. I don't know what we'll do in the future, but I think for the indefinite run, the Zoom is working very well. And it's something that I think we should consider kind of keeping in our mix of things we can use when things go back to normal, hopefully at some time. Justice Melton?
Yeah, I think pretty similarly. Our main interaction with the public is on oral argument days, and Zoom has been great for us. I won't say it's been better, but we certainly don't feel like we're at any disadvantage by having to use Zoom. So we definitely can use it. I tend to think that we will go back to live oral arguments, but it will be a tool for us. And maybe we do it every now and then just to serve as a relief valve for those who might want to avoid the travel to Atlanta once a term, or I don't know. We're going to think about that, but it's certainly much more doable. When I first came on the court in 2005, we actually had remote arguments. All you had to do was ask for it, and you had to make yourself available at a location that had a certain type of technology, and oftentimes that meant going to the Bar Center in Tifton or the Bar Center in Savannah. And it was hugely complicated, but largely the delay factor was huge, and we would start asking a question. It would take a while for them to hear you asking a question, so it looked like they were talking over you, and you'd pause, they paused. So that was going on a lot, and eventually we just stopped. But we're at a whole new day now, so that's going to be a tool. The one thing I think it will continue to make a difference for us will be more in the back office side of things. We've got Judge McMillan, who joined our court during the midst of this pandemic, and she's yet to move into her office. 100% of her operations for her entire chambers has been remotely, and she hasn't missed a step. And so we're more convinced that we can do our jobs and interact with our attorneys and circulate papers and drafts and comments and everything else without coming into the office. So I think from a workplace standpoint, we're going to continue doing a good bit of remote work.
From a professionalism standpoint, is there anything that y'all have noticed or that y'all would want to advise us about? For instance, have you noticed something like that there's been a professionalism issue because of doing something remotely? And unfortunately, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but obviously we have the duty to uphold our standards regardless of whether we are practicing in front of y'all in person or in front of y'all virtually. And have you noticed anything in terms of professionalism that has changed or faltered because we're practicing virtually rather than in person? Judge Jackson?
Well, again, I think, using the virtual platform is new. And so it's some of the stuff that we've all heard about and laughed about, but it's really not funny because we are still conducting court. And so we have Zoom rules in DeKalb. So for example, if you are a party, you have to show your face. And it is unacceptable to just call in and use the audio feature on any of the virtual platforms. And that's for obvious reasons, because people need to know who they're communicating with and want to be sure that, you're captive to the issue. I think we all heard about a couple of weeks ago, the lawyer, or at least I'm assuming you heard about the lawyer who stood up during the hearing and had only dressed the top half of his body. And we all do that. I'm only dressed on the top half of my body as well. I have a very casual dress on, but I put a jacket on over it. And so I'm very attentive to not move from in front of the screen because the dress I have on underneath the jacket is casual. But there are people who, lawyers specifically, who attempted to do that when we started conducting Zoom hearings. And so I think it goes without saying that if we're going to continue in the virtual environment, people have to be very serious and mindful that these are still formal hearings that are recorded. And so even if you try to delete it, it's recorded. So anything you do on there, we heard a toilet flush one day with a lawyer. And, you know, when you're talking, you know this, it highlights the screen in green, at least. So I can see where the noise is coming from. And so someone had to chat and tell the lawyer that we heard the toilet flush. So it's those kinds of things that if we're going to continue in the virtual environment, we just have to be mindful of it. That being said, I understand that we're in a pandemic. And before everybody got on the call, we were all kind of laughing and joking and just about our children appearing in videos. And I myself was in the middle of a hearing, and my 6-year-old decided to put on her unicorn onesie. It's a wintertime onesie. And I didn't even see her standing behind me, creeping back and forth and waving at people. So it's going to happen. You know, those kinds of things are not offensive to me, at least as a judge. I understand that people have childcare issues and the environment is just very different right now. But I think we just have to all strive our very level best to continue to be professional, to remember to mute your Zoom when you're not speaking so that we don't hear all of your family business in the background. And then just to be prepared. You know, if you have to, you know, pause your video for a moment if something's happening, I think that would be appropriate because things happen unexpectedly. So that's what I just wanted to comment on, is just some of the things that I've seen on the Zoom in the last couple of weeks during hearings. But if your dog steps across your lap or your child walks across the screen, you know, it happens.
Thank you, Judge.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate that as a mother of 2 young children. I appreciate that, and I think a lot of us struggle with the trying to be professionals and working from home, and it's a tough balance to meet that balance. And I know, Judge Edline, you said you had 3 kids at home with you. I'm sure you've faced, and they're teenagers, so I can't quite understand that because mine aren't that old yet, but I'm sure you've faced similar things. And what, in terms of professionalism, would you echo what Judge Jackson is saying, or do you have different or another piece of advice?
I think that Judge Jackson is spot on with a lot of that. But, you know, part of it is just be kind to one another. I mean, as lawyers, we're advocates for our clients, but that doesn't mean you have to act like a jerk. Especially, we don't know what somebody's situation is, whether it's another lawyer or a party, and whether they are on strict quarantine because somebody that they live with or themselves, that they have health issues or something. I mean, we just don't know what's happening with people right now. And I will have to say, I have been really, really impressed with the professionalism of the lawyers. There have been far fewer discovery disputes during COVID than there have been regularly. Lisa Liang, my staff attorney, is on this call, and I can see her nodding her head affirmatively. That I think people really are trying to work things out and just give people a little bit more flexibility. And so I continue to encourage people to do that. It's not just when you're on a Zoom call with a judge, it's when you're trying to schedule things or giving extensions. It's all been uncertain for everybody. And so I really have appreciated that the lawyers have really taken that to heart.
Do you see the same, Judge Brasher, where it's you're seeing fewer? I don't want to say that discovery disputes are petty, because they're not, but I appreciate.
Sometimes they are. Sometimes they are.
I appreciate Judge Edline saying, you know, be kind, because you don't know what people are going through right now. I mean, this is clearly unprecedented. And so in trying to practice during this time, it's hard to refer back to a time when we've gone through something like this. And so what are you seeing in terms of being professional? What advice do you have for that?
So my observation is that there is a pretty significant self-selection bias that's going on with the folks that are willing to participate in the virtual hearings, to handle things, to move things forward through the virtual processes we've put out there. Because I know from looking at our caseload that there are a lot of people who aren't. There are a lot of people that are, have basically set on their cases for the last few months, and it was somewhat of a rude awakening when we sent to them our Justice Melton will be glad to hear particularized order in their case that said we were reimposing the deadlines and that things had to move along. There was some righteous indignation that we heard back about those. But the folks that are willing to participate are extremely professional and are doing their level best to move their cases forward in the only avenue that's available to them, and that's through the virtual proceedings. And so I think there's going to be a reckoning for that coming up, because the reality is, when, for Superior Court especially, when the criminal cases come back online, much as I alluded to earlier, much of the oxygen is going to be sucked out of the room as far as court proceedings are concerned. We anticipate significant numbers of cases that will all be indicted at about the same time. We anticipate lots of demands for speedy trial. We anticipate lots, having all hands on deck to try those cases. And so those who are wise and proactive and are working through their cases now will have a much more positive result on the other end of this process than those who are using this as an opportunity not to. So I've been very pleased by the folks that I've seen. I will say that I have seen a minority of the litigants and lawyers in the cases that we have, because the others have chosen not to push their cases forward. So those would be my observations.
And Justice Melton, I guess my question for you in sort of overseeing all this and having to wrangle everybody and making all these decisions, how have you seen a change in professionalism at all?
Well, everything I do is anecdotal. I'll tell you that when we first had our initial declared emergency, the objective was to just stop, freeze as much as possible, make sure everybody's safe, and focus on baseline critical functions that the courts need to execute in order to keep society civil. As we kind of settled into the new norm, it became clear that we had the technological capacity, the desire, the bandwidth to start moving some things. And so our second order, the first extension, started this "don't be a jerk," a DBJ provision, as we call it. It started inserting these provisions into the orders because we needed to start moving things out of fear that the backlogs would build up. And there's some things you could be doing on cases. You could be doing discovery, if all things being equal. You could be doing your legal research, writing your motions to dismiss and filing those and filing responses, all things being equal. But as we sought and urged judges to press forward, we wanted lawyers to press forward as well and not use the pandemic as leverage in your case, not use the pandemic as a reason not to do anything. And we inserted that provision to urge lawyers to do the right thing in that environment. But we also directed it towards judges. You'd be happy to know, because we wanted judges to make sure that they were mindful as they pushed to move their cases, that they would hear from lawyers and the parties not knowing exactly what might be going on in their individual lives that might call for some type of an accommodation. As far as I know, we haven't done any surveys, but anecdotally that seems to be working. I am hearing some concerns that, as we begin to loosen up a little bit, some judges might be packing people in the courtrooms a little bit more than they should. And we need to continue to urge judges to take that seriously. It might be that we have some judges out here that aren't as concerned about pandemic, but the reality is if they're not, there are others who are. And we need to at least be sensitive to those needs, even if we don't agree with that perspective. It's a real perspective, and we need to be sensitive to it.
And so I want to ask you this, Judge Doyle. One of the things I heard Judge Brasher say and then Justice Melton say is that some litigants and then perhaps even some judges were using the pandemic to perhaps sit on their cases or do things with their cases that they wouldn't otherwise do. I think in the Court of Appeals, that's not necessarily the way that you see things, because that's not necessarily how you interact with cases. But if someone does that and starts, I mean, to me, that seems like a real quick way to damage your reputation. If you use the pandemic as an excuse to either not work on a case or use it against somebody, do you agree that that's a quick way to damage your reputation? And if so, how would you suggest repairing your reputation if that's the method that you took?
Yeah, you're kind of playing off one of your questions you had on here, which kind of talks about maintaining your reputation. And what I had kind of written down was that, make sure that you follow through with things you say you're going to do and don't overpromise. And I think maybe this idea in the timing of the pandemic, and I'm really, at the Court of Appeals, you're right. I'm working on cases that people filed briefs back in October, November, December before any of this happened. It says, from my worldview, there's been very little impact at this point at the Court of Appeals. But I watch my husband, who is a lawyer, litigator, and his clients are primarily in South Korea. And they are endeavoring to do a lot of discovery. And watching him go through this, because his client, who he talked to last night, they aren't going back to the office till the end of June, supposedly. They may start going back. So the idea of, can I get this discovery done? Can I get the information, the affidavit I need to get to this motion? I think this is a very complicated time for a lot of lawyers when you're working on it. So I think it's about making sure that through this time you are honest with the opposing counsel about what your circumstances are. That, that from your perspective is if you're trying to get extensions for things that you have really good reasons for them. Maybe it's because I cannot answer the discovery because there is nobody working in that office to go through these documents for the next 30 days. And when they do, it's probably going to take longer than it might otherwise have taken because they were, at a quarter capacity, those sort of things. And so I just think that everybody needs to just keep reminding themselves about it. It's bad enough when we're not there's a telemarketer calling me, sorry. When we're not in a pandemic to get these things done, but when we're in a pandemic to make sure that people are really thinking practically and really communicating well with each other. I'm going to put you on mute for just a second.
Well, it's hard during these times, even thinking about what our clients have to do. And I'm sure a lot of you have had this where you've asked a client, well, do you have a printer at home where you could print this and sign this? Or do you have access to a scanner where you could scan this to me? Or, do you have access to this? Do you have access to that? A notary? I mean, even just things that frankly, we would often take for granted because it was very easy for clients to do pre-COVID, now is very difficult. And I think to your point, Judge Doyle, we've had to be upfront with opposing counsel and clients in saying those types of things that, look, my client can't do this because of X. you know, I can't get to a UPS store because the UPS store is closed and that's where the notary is, or the notary won't agree to meet with me, or whatever it is. Thankfully now there's the virtual notary option. And so we can do some things like that, but just some logistical issues that we didn't think about to help us move our cases forward. So I think some of these things, you know, we have to work through that we hadn't thought about before. Judge Jackson, I want to ask you, what are some tips that you would have for you know, establishing and maintaining your reputation and credibility, whether it's during the pandemic or afterwards?
Sure. I have appreciated where I can see that the lawyers are working together to narrow the issues and to agree to things that perhaps were outstanding. And I'm seeing quite a bit of that where I will get orders. We are working in a queue system, which essentially means that we set up a process by which orders that are drafted by the attorneys can flow through to the court. My staff attorney gets it, then I can get it, I can make changes, and it'll keep going through the flow directly to the clerk and then be disseminated back to the parties. The goal of which is that people will get the information much faster than they would pre-pandemic. And so to that end, for example, I got, just before I got on this call, in a civil case, a request for a 4-month discovery extension, a protective order where the parties had worked out their issue concerning some of the documents. And this was something outstanding. I think they were going to be coming to me to help them resolve before, but they worked it out. And so it was refreshing to see that people are doing that and understand that we want to move some of these cases forward and that is in fact expected. Notwithstanding that, I agree with what Judge Doyle said. I think you need to just be upfront and honest about what you have going on. Don't assume that we know anything. We don't know who has, as I said earlier, child care concerns. Those are very real concerns as we think about reopening the courthouse. You know, we're thinking about, and we've received recommendations about having staggered schedules for our staff, not just because of the potential for contamination and infection, but also because things are happening in real life. You have people who have childcare issues. You have people who have pre-existing conditions. We don't know any of those things about individual litigants. And so not that you have to, you know, call our chambers and reveal your protected health information, but if you have something like that going on, if you just give us a heads up, I think most of us are willing to work out the schedule around those issues. But don't assume that we know that or that we think you have that going on, because some of us are really planning to move full speed ahead in the new environment. And by that, I mean scheduling, you know, hearings. And as I said earlier, for example, each division in DeKalb is going to have limited in-person time if and when we do return to in-person hearings. I'm not so sure when we'll do that, but when we do, we will have limited time because we have to share the building capacity with all the other courts and offices. And so if you have a time that's scheduled, if you wait until the day before to let us know that you had a pre-existing condition and that you're concerned about coming, I'm sure that that's not going to bode well for the judges and their staff as we're trying to accommodate you. That's the kind of information where as soon as you get the notice, if you have a concern, it doesn't matter to us whether we think your concern is valid or not. It's how you feel in this pandemic, but we just need to know as soon as possible. And so we are endeavoring to communicate that message broadly. I don't want anybody to come if they feel uncomfortable. I know this is a very real health concern and health challenge for a lot of people and their family. And I just want to know so that I can appropriately schedule the limited amount of time that I will have to hear your matter in person. The other thing is, you know, just being honest, I think, with your colleagues and trying to work these matters out. I think that is so critically important because you know what happens. We all know what happens when, you know, people wait till the last minute and they raise emergencies or concerns. Then you lose credibility with opposing counsel, and then that's when the fight starts. So in this environment, I think we just all have to show a little grace. That's what I've been saying to each other, exercise a little grace, but also just be honest and upfront so that you can help us to help you.
I appreciate that so much. I think it's so it's refreshing to hear from a judge that I mean, everybody has different levels of tolerance of how they see this pandemic and what their I think just their tolerance level of what they're willing to do and what they're not. And I didn't realize from a lawyer perspective, I didn't think about the capacity issue that DeKalb County was going to face. And I practice in all different courts. And so if DeKalb County is doing that, I'm sure Fulton's doing that and Cobb's doing that and all the other courts are doing that too. And if I wait, that means that I'm screwing up Cobb, I could be screwing up DeKalb, I could be screwing up Fulton. And so that makes sense to me that you're saying that, Judge. And so if we all on this call hear that and know, okay, if we get this information that we have to appear in person, and then work with your staff to try to figure out a way to make it so it's comfortable for everybody, that makes sense. That makes sense to me, and it's helpful to know that that's a possibility, that we could come to something that's more acceptable for our, what we think is our risk tolerance or our client's risk tolerance. I'm sure that's helpful information. I know we've reached 5:30 and we told y'all that we could be done then, but what our judges have agreed to do, if you're willing, is have a little bit of a happy half hour. Now, we told them they could be done at 6. So I have, if y'all have any questions for them, you can write them in the chat and I can ask the questions. I have a couple fun questions for the judge that I wanted to ask them. The first is, where is the first place you will travel when we are allowed to travel again? And Judge Brasher, I want to start with you. Where's the first place you're going to travel when we're allowed to travel again?
Well, it's hard to decide because we've already missed 2 trips we were supposed to take. So, but we've got some good friends in England, and we probably will travel to London to see them. So that'll be a nice trip just to get away, and that's probably our first choice.
Justice Melton?
I haven't been told yet. My wife told me to give her some dates that I would block off on the calendar, which I have done. And she told me how many days to give her, which I have done. And she has not reported back.
Okay. Okay. Judge Doyle?
I was supposed to go to Hawaii in April, and then it got pushed to July 22nd, but they're not opening until August 1st, so that got canceled. So maybe Hawaii with my kids, we'll see.
Oh, that would be fantastic. Judge Edline?
Well, one of the big things that we did is we were planning a trip for this summer so we could have some family time. That was the big holiday gift for our kids. And we gave our kids the choice of, several different locations, all of which have now been canceled. So I'm going to leave it up to my kids to try to plan some travel. I don't know when, especially if it's going to be international. Who knows? So basically, I have absolutely no idea. It's almost like I don't want to plan it because I'm so scared it'll get canceled. Like, I know other people have had the same. Yeah, Judge Doyle's waving her hand there because I know she's had some trips canceled. So I don't know. I was bummed. We always go to New Orleans for the French Quarter Festival. It's been a trip we've taken with family friends for years and years and years. And we were supposed to go in April, and they moved it to October, and then it's canceled completely. So that'll be a trip I'm taking.
Judge Jackson?
Yeah, just like everybody else, I'm kind of stuck here. We were headed to Disney World in Orlando again, and then that got canceled, so I wasn't terribly unhappy about that. But then my birthday trip to Cartagena got canceled, and I was pretty bummed out about that. So it might be Callaway Gardens.
I've been wanting to take the kids there. We haven't done that yet. Oh, I've got a fun question for you. Has anybody officiated any weddings? Oh, Judge Edline and Judge Jackson have officiated weddings. Excellent.
Is this the pandemic or just ever?
No, I did it last Friday. I did it at a park in Roswell that's beautiful that I'd not been to before, with a beautiful water fountain, or several beautiful water fountains in the park. And the couple's wedding was supposed to take place in Cabo, and it got canceled. And so I was honored that they asked me to come and marry them by the fountain at the park in Roswell last Friday.
What about you, Judge Edline?
My neighbor's original wedding plans got canceled, so I married them on their front porch. And I've got a wedding that was supposed to be a great big shindig earlier this year that got postponed until next summer, but we're gonna do a small wedding in their backyard this weekend.
Wow. Excellent. Excellent. Now, y'all, what would your Zoom background be if you could do something fun for your Zoom background? What would it be? Judge Edline?
I was trying to show you all earlier, but I don't have a green screen, but I've got a picture of Anchorman with them actually doing that. That would be and I could be right in the middle of Christina Applegate and Will Ferrell, but